For a very long time, there have been mysterious rumors and reports of extraterrestrials among us. Many conspiracy theorists believe we are indeed not alone, that aliens disguised as humans have infiltrated our society. While such an idea sounds truly absurd, the spooky reports continue, and so let us dive into their wonderful weirdness now. Our first report of an alleged alien infiltrator is from a website called Think About It Docs, specifically from an individual they refer to as Commander X, who is claimed to be of significant authority in the intelligence community. According to him, aliens are not only on this planet but also living among us disguised as other humans, and he has numerous reports of eerie encounters with them. Some reports come from a location known as Dulce Base, allegedly a facility located underground on the border of Colorado and New Mexico, not far from Dulce, New Mexico. There are many strange theories surrounding this place, including the idea that the government is not only holding aliens there but also reverse engineering UFOs, as well as the notion that the facility is run by both humans and extraterrestrials. There are those who speak of humans being used as guinea pigs by aliens for strange genetic experiments, including experiments on abductees, battles between the Delta Force and non-humans, and shape-shifting aliens on the base. The one identified as Commander X claims it is all very real indeed, with many base personnel kept in the dark regarding the true activities taking place there. He further states the location is in part run by shape-shifting aliens disguised as humans, and he points to one report in particular from a private once stationed at Dulce. The private is said to have had no real prior knowledge of the true goings-on at the base, but this all changed when he witnessed a small part of it for himself. In his own words, quote, "One morning last September, I was working on a routine job when another of the young enlistees, a mechanic, came in with a small rush job he wanted welded at once. He had the print and proceeded to show me exactly what he wanted. We are both bending over the bench in front of the welder when I happened to look directly into his face. It seemed to suddenly become covered with a semi-transparent film or cloud. His features faded and in their place appeared a quote-unquote thing with bulging eyes, no hair, and scales for skin. I stood and looked at it for about 20 seconds. Whatever it was stood and looked at me without moving. Then the strange face seemed to fade away, and at the same time recede into the ordinary face of the young man underneath. The dissipation of the imposed face lasted or took about 5 seconds before it was completely gone, and I was standing there weak, my mouth open and staring at the young man who had come in with the rush order. The young quote-unquote man did not seem to be conscious of the elapsed time when I had observed all this, but went right on talking about the job as if nothing had happened. This is hard to take, but I assure you it was still harder for me. No one can realize a jolt you get from seeing anything like this until they have experienced it for themselves. It was several days before I had myself convinced that maybe after all what I had seen was real and that I was not suffering from illusions and the beginning of insanity." End quote. This wasn't the end of it, however. He had another strange encounter just a few days later, and says of it, quote, "The next time was later at night at the guardhouse near the front gate on the way to work. I had purchased some small items, and on arriving I went around to the guardhouse with my slip to retrieve my package. There was only one guard on duty. I handed him the check and he began to look at the package, taking his time. I waited a minute, then happened to look directly at him again. His face began to change. Again, a face of a strange creature was imposed. You could see through the imposed face for a few seconds, and then it became the only one visible. Solidified is the word. And again about 20 seconds duration. Again 5 seconds for dissipation, and the guard started to move normally again. Found my package and gravely handed it to me, and I walked out without a word being said." End quote. This base is not the only place with alleged strange sightings. Another is Dugway Proving Ground, DPG, a U.S. Army facility near Salt Lake City founded in 1942 for the purpose of testing various kinds of weapons. As the Think About It site puts it, quote, "Aside from Dulce, New Mexico, and the Nevada test site, other areas where these quote-unquote chameleon sightings have taken place include Deep Springs, California, where these alien quote-unquote imposters have allegedly been sighted, and Dugway, Utah, where one woman by the name of Barbara, who worked as a hairstylist, claimed she saw one of the high-ranking military officials transform temporarily into an entity with quote-unquote reptilian features." years. Another source at Dugway who worked in an auto shop claimed that he saw a similar phenomenon while changing the tires on the car of one Dugway military official. Remember that Dugway works closely with Area 51, which is just to the west and across the state border. It is interesting that there are claims that the joint CIA alien activity within the quote-unquote dreamland underground complexes of Nevada have and are being extended to the underground facilities below the St. George and Dugway areas of Utah, among other sites. End quote. Another absurd-sounding report allegedly originates from a facility south of Seattle known as the Madigan Military Hospital. UFO investigator Val Valerian claims the hospital is thoroughly haunted by reptilian aliens disguised as humans. Writing in the Leading Edge newsletter, he says, quote, "About a year ago, we ran into several people who stated that they, quote-unquote, had heard that, quote, reptilian humanoids were working at a U.S. Army hospital, end quote, near Fort Lewis, Washington." At that point, these statements were simply filed away in rumor status, pending the arrival of something more substantial. Descriptions of the nature of and appearance of alien humanoid forms that could be termed quote-unquote reptilian vary widely. Reptilian humanoids have been described in Italy as looking very lizard-like, even with tails. Logic would seem to tell us that if alien humanoids were in fact in quote-unquote collusion with military medical personnel at a hospital, they would not in fact have the appearance of anything other than humans, or be close enough to humans to blend in. About a month ago, the nature of synchronicity brought me to an espresso bar where I chanced to engage a lady in her early 50s in some small conversation about an entirely unrelated matter. She had been a nurse for some 20 years, and 16 of those 20 years had been spent working for the U.S. Army. She retired from the service and was now job hunting in the local area. She was very professional and seemed to know a lot about the nursing field. Gradually, her conversation got around to a quote-unquote very unusual place, Madigan Military Hospital, which is located on Route 5 south of Seattle. She had applied for work at the hospital and noticed that it was indeed a hospital unlike any she had ever seen before. Madigan is a brand new $150 million facility built about a year or so ago. From her description, there are small R2-D2 type robots that shuttle prescriptions between floors. All the equipment is prototype quote-unquote one of a kind, like laser x-rays and a lot of equipment that was extremely high-tech. It was not this alone which piqued my interest, but a comment she made later. She made the statement that when she entered a specific lab in the hospital, she noticed that all the personnel were extremely absorbed in their work. Nothing too uncommon about that. But then she stated that she had the thought that some of the equipment looked quite alien, and two men who looked exactly alike turned and looked at her in response to her thought. She said that the eyes of these two men were quite penetrating and that they both moved in unison. That got my interest. She then stated that during the tour of the facility, the individual who was escorting her said that the top floor of the hospital and two of the sub-basement floors were top secret R&D areas and were off limits to both military and civilian personnel. That really got my attention. End quote. Apparently, the nurse had some wild tales to tell regarding her hospital visit, including that it had equipment much more technologically sophisticated than she had ever seen, as well as there being very strange and mysterious operations on patients. She says of one, quote, "I noticed that a patient walked over and climbed on an exam table. The procedure they were doing always requires that the patient must be sedated. However, I noticed that the physician leaned over the patient and touched the patient in the center of the forehead with quote-unquote his index and middle finger of one hand. Immediately, the patient fell into a state of sedation and the procedure was started." What kind of doctor can touch a patient in that way and sedate him? I looked around at the other personnel in the room at this time. There were two, a private first class and a specialist fourth class at opposite ends of the room from where I was standing. Both of these men were the same size, had the same skin color, and moved in a very deliberate manner. I was talking with a sergeant and happened to say something to myself very softly while having the thought how strange these people seemed. Both other men turned and looked at me almost as if to stare at me. I got this strange feeling. I had heard before from a friend whose brother had made the uncharacteristic comment that, quote, aliens worked at Madigan, end quote. Quote unquote, all the people in the room and the military personnel in general that I had seen in the hospital seemed to move very slowly, almost in slow motion. I left the area and went back to the sergeant's office. End quote. She was so deeply fascinated by the weird hospital that she returned with a friend a few weeks later, a visit that only served to deepen her dark suspicions. She says of it, quote, "My friend and I entered through what is known as the Clinic Mall. This area houses the outpatient clinic. There were very few people there for such a large clinic. We were told that there are 3 floors beneath the hospital and 1 floor above that are off limits to all personnel, military and civilian, and that these areas were classified top secret and were research and development (R&D) areas. There are very unusual antennas on top of the hospital. The 3-story main service area has a complex on top of it that appears to have no entrance and no windows. Judging from the way the hospital is built, there are a lot of quote-unquote dead areas that comprise spaces that cannot be accessed from the main service area. The personal feeling we both got being in the hospital was that we started to feel very drained, and we both experienced getting a dull headache. It wasn't until we had driven several miles from the facility that we started to feel better." End quote. What is really going on with this devilish location? Could it actually be employing aliens in disguise? The idea is pure nonsense, but the story is also so strange that it is hard to fully dismiss. Similar weird, and surely false, reports claim the aliens have even infiltrated the Pentagon and other government agencies. To again quote, think about it, quote, "Sometime during the 1980s, a secretary working in the Pentagon noticed a high-ranking Pentagon quote-unquote official who had apparently lost a contact lens. The eye from where the lens fell out was not human, but instead contained a vertically slit pupil. No one working at the Pentagon seemed to know where the official worked, although they had apparently assumed that he was supposed to be there in some capacity or another. The secretary, however, informed her superiors of the strange incident, and immediately security personnel approached the quote-unquote officer, who apparently was not aware of his missing contact lens. The quote-unquote man did not make any major attempts to resist. When the apartment of this quote-unquote official was searched, copies of several sensitive documents on the Star Wars or Strategic Defense Initiative program were discovered. Apparently, the entity had been stealing the documents and transmitting their contents to some point beyond the planet. Rumor had it that the entity was physically examined, and it was discovered that its internal organs were not human. Several areas across the western U.S. where surface and/or underground military installations exist have reportedly produced similar quote-unquote chameleon sightings. There seems to be a trend which involves the infiltration of the NSA, CIA, and the subsequent quote-unquote replacement of agency personnel, and in turn military-industrial personnel, by alien life forms not loyal to planet Earth nor to the human race in general. These reports are very similar to other reports that made the rounds within quote-unquote fringe research groups during the early 1980s concerning the reported quote-unquote assimilation of high-ranking communist officials and scientists by serpent-like humanoids, reptilian beings that were reputedly revived out of suspended animation from a frozen city that was discovered under the northern Siberian ice fields. This was referred to as the quote-unquote Siberian Affair. End quote. Another bizarre account is that of an alleged military operation to follow and detain an alien infiltrator. According to UFO researcher Victor Martinez, who claims to be a former federal employee, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, U.S. Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and other government agencies have for a long time been involved in secret operations connected with extraterrestrials disguised as humans, and he tells of one operation in particular that took place in 1980 known as Operation Tango Sierra. He states he discovered this through a contact at the DIA, and that this person described secret government plans to track and capture an alien living among us disguised as a human. It allegedly started with a federal employee abducted by an alien. The contact stated, quote, "The original operation began in early 1980 when an Earth female was identified by U.S. intelligence as being a so-called alien abductee. She had been abducted by a male non-human in 1977, which was her first abduction. This woman was single, 23 years old, and a trusted, well-respected U.S. government employee. The male non-human showed the Earth woman abductee projections of alien life on another planet. The projection was from a small, triangle device. The woman viewed this projection, which she described as images displayed in a three-dimensional quote-unquote holographic view. The male non-human never harmed the Earth woman abductee. During the 3 years of her ongoing abduction, the Earth woman was taken by the male non-human through a quote-unquote veil of light to another place. The Earth woman described this place as being quote-unquote a light bubble. She would sit inside the bubble and view these holographic projections with the male non-human. On one occasion, the male non-human introduced the Earth woman to another male, whom the Earth woman described in debriefing details as not being human, i.e., not being an Earth male abductee. The Earth woman called this other being a quote-unquote creature. This creature performed a medical examination on the Earth woman. The woman did not fully consent to the alien's examination as she was temporarily paralyzed. After the examination, the woman was taken back to her residence. When the Earth woman brought up her abduction by a male alien to the attention of a coworker, the coworker contacted an office security official, who then contacted U.S. intelligence officials. U.S. intelligence spent hours and hours vetting the woman's story, conducting thorough background investigations, performing surveillance, and administering several polygraph examinations. The Earth woman's story was eventually deemed to be factually true and correct. U.S. intelligence then mounted a very special, highly classified operation to capture this alien being, who lived near Landover, Maryland. End quote. Allegedly, a thorough investigation was launched that took 5 months and approximately 60 intelligence officers whose job it was to verify if this entity was in fact an alien from another world as well as a potential national security threat. The enigmatic being was supposedly detected, tracked, and captured before being interrogated. According to the report, quote, the male non-human was interrogated by teams of AFOSI special agents over several weeks and in total was questioned and intensely interrogated for many months by other agencies. It was during this time that the male non-human disclosed its race, its resident planet, and the reason it came to Earth. The male alien basically cooperated and provided details of its life on his alien homeworld. The non-human entity was released on the direct orders of then-President Carter in late 1980, and subsequently left Earth and returned to its home planet. The male non-human originated from the star system Delta Pavonis, 20 light-years from Earth, where it was the 4th planet from their sun. It is roughly the same size as our Earth. The travel time to Earth was 18 Earth months, using a very complex propulsion system and time-space displacement travel mode. Back then in 1980, we could not understand the alien propulsion system and we never saw his spacecraft. When President Carter let the male non-human leave, he just vanished. I was never in the intelligence loop as to how he left or how he departed Earth. I'm not sure how they learned English so well nor other languages. You've got to remember that this was extreme compartmentalization. I knew just what I was supposed to know. There is much more to the alien debriefing that I do not know. From what I've learned over the years, this race of alien beings originally came to Earth as explorers about a century ago. Apparently, they could assume the human shape and form and easily live among us. With respect to the male non-human's employment, he worked as a records keeper for the U.S. Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C. He was able to manufacture his own identification documents by assuming the name/ID of a deceased Earth human. He was in a career that did not require a high-level security clearance, thereby enabling him to escape the much greater scrutiny given to quote-unquote secret clearance-level background checks and above. End quote. According to Martinez's source, even though the extraterrestrial appeared completely human, his entire race being very capable of doing so, they were anything but human, their true form being hideous and wretched. Additionally, he revealed some of the alien's agenda, saying, quote, although they possessed the human shape, form, and basic anatomy, they were not human beings like you and me. Their actual, normal, quote-unquote real appearance was that of a hideous-looking creature that would most certainly scare, frighten, and terrify a normal Earth human. Above all, they did not have any extra powers nor abilities. They had no weapons and never tried to harm Earth humans. Their sole intent and stated mission was that they just wanted to study Earth humans and obtain the basic structure of the human body, anatomy, and social interplay. I don't know how many others of this specific type of aliens were among us, as I was not authorized that specific highly classified information. However, I am positive that there were more similar type operations than just this one. Operation Tango Sierra was just one operation that lasted 9 months from start to finish in the DC area. U.S. intelligence had more such operations around the U.S., with one in the southwest and another in the northwest, but I don't know for sure on the location details. Indeed, the government was claimed to be very intently focused on investigating, quote, the presence of extraterrestrial creatures having infiltrated the highest levels of the United States government. As for other visiting alien races, we know of 9 of them. The Ebens, or Ebens, were the nicest, while the Trantaloids were the ugliest, meanest sons of bitches and most dangerous. I only know that the very inner circle of our government knows. That is about all I can tell you. I never spoke with the male non-human in Operation Tango Sierra, but I was actively involved in this operation. Most of the older fellows who knew all of this are dead now. Former CIA Director Richard M. Helms was our boss for this operation. He died some years ago. End quote. Commander X states that the numerous alien races utilize shape-shifting chameleon abilities, including the so-called Greys and Reptilians, and these involve specific technologies such as, quote, reconstructive surgery, molecular shape-shifting occult technology, techno-hypnotic transmitters, and portable laser hologram technology. End quote. Allegedly, the technology is highly advanced and difficult to detect, though some have managed to do so. Researcher George Andrews, author of Extraterrestrial Friends and Foes, has this to say on the matter of unveiling the alien illusions. Quote, a friend of mine and 4 of his friends experimented with crystalline structures a year or 2 ago, and they figured out how to cut them along certain planes so they could actually see the aura or energy field around people. That's when they discovered that all people aren't quote-unquote people, or the people they thought they were. It appears that some ET humanoids have a dark blue ovoid aura. It so happens that all the people they checked that met these criteria also wore dark glasses and made every attempt to act like they really wanted nothing to do with people in general. They followed one of these people out into the desert where he evidently had a trailer. After waiting until dusk, they made a pretense of needing help and knocked on the door. After a short while, the light went on and the man came to the door. He looked normal, except that his pupils were vertical slits instead of circles. It works. The only trouble is that it costs $2,000 to put a pair of those glasses together. End quote. It is all very strange. We are left baffled and bewildered by these unusual tales. Could there be actual aliens lurking among us, disguised as humans? Are they your neighbor, your boss, your delivery driver? Are they YouTubers? Or is this all just the product of humans seeing things that aren't really there, whose phantom visions are then uploaded to the internet where they are spread and distorted even further by the denizens of the digital realm? It is surely only those who are truly wacko amongst us that would believe these things are real. Or perhaps that's just what they want you to believe.